Good evening and welcome to the Unbroken Channel's Down But Not Out podcast, episode 10. Tonight we have a special guest joining us, Jonny Ball, who, well, we'll get into his story, but he's an Invictus medalist, and I think that will sum up his journey after he tells us his story. Co-host with me tonight, we've got Ange Westbrook. Evening, Ange. Evening, Jonny.
Hello.
Good evening.
So, thanks for joining us tonight, Jonny. It's strange because you've just been talking about Chris. I almost called you Chris like 3 times, and I had to sort of almost pause and note it's Jonny. So, you're joining us tonight from whereabouts in the world are you at the moment?
I am in the Shire of Northamptonshire, so in the Midlands. They originally hail from down south in southeast in Kent. But yeah, this has been my home now for a number of years. My wife's from Leicestershire as well. So the East Midlands is where it's at and where my little girl was born as well. So yeah, Northampton.
Nice. And Ange, you're up north.
Well,
you're your sisters.
No, I live in Lincoln, so I'm Midlands as well. But I'm on a course in London at the minute, so I'm sitting in my sister's house in Royston in Cambridgeshire.
And I'm down on the sunny south coast still in my new office / studio / gym / my space. So yeah, it's raining. I don't know. It's just the way it is. So tonight we've got, like I say, Jonny joining us, and we're just going to start off nice and easy. Jonny, if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, what inspired you to join up, and where you served.
Yeah, I always wanted to be a soldier. Like most of us, I think the bug really hit me from the age of about 13 when I joined my local army cadets. And that was the Remy cadets down in Ashford in Kent. And still today, some of those guys and girls that I was in cadets with are some of my closest friends from childhood. I was always that kid. I was the middle child of 3 boys. And then we had my late sister, sadly died 5 years ago. She was the eldest. So I was kind of had the middle child syndrome and really came out of my shell at cadets, really. I was a bit of a chubby kid, quite introverted, quite lonely at times. And this will come apparent when I talk about my injury later on. And the cadets really brought it out of me and inspired me around service and about teamwork and being something bigger than yourself. And this was really then fueled further by my grandfather, who served in the Royal West Kent Regiment and taught me how to ball my boots and really enthused me. So when the time came, at 17 years of age, a few of my friends went off as boy soldiers at 16, but I joined my local TA unit, as it was known back then, the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, and also at the same time stayed in the cadets. So I was a cadet RSM at 18 and a private soldier at 17, which was a bit of a weird thing. And I just completely bought into it, went on every single exercise I could, from going in a helicopter at the age of 17 on exercise in the UK. And then the opportunity came to go into the regular army on what was known as an S-type engagement back then. So that was specifically for Northern Ireland. So I deployed with the 1st Battalion, the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, the Tigers, to West Belfast in 1998. And as an 18-year-old, was on the ground, on patrol, accompanying the Royal Ulster Constabulary, as it was known back then, on operations in West Belfast. Learned pretty quickly how to duck from rocks and bricks being chucked by the local civ pop. And also, that was my first encounter of what politics meant on military operations, because, of course, the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998. And I was on the ground in West Belfast when the peace process was going through. I look at photos of me now and that cliche, and the cliches are there for a reason, right? I went there a boy and definitely came back a man, because the photo difference of the 2 people are different. And then I went back that summer for the marching season and Drum Cree, and was reminded of that time in the Beckham documentary recently, and the game against the Argentines where Beckham did that little flick. Well, I'll tell you where I was that day. I was in one side of the room of Long Kesh camp on the side of the Maze prison about doing public order training, and we were doing civ pop against the Highlanders who were on the other side of the room, and they were cheering on every time the RGs did something. And the next day we went into battle against each other playing civ pop in riots, and that was tasty. So yeah, that was the start of my military career, which then continued. My dream was to be a regular army infantry officer. So I went off to university, was in the officers training corps, did Cambrian patrol, learned how to went sports parachuting, learned how to ski, went paragliding, every opportunity that's thrown at me. And then my world came crashing down when I failed both the regular commissions board and the medical at the same time, despite being earmarked of having you're going to do really well. In the briefing, I scored really highly, and that wouldn't have been a problem. I could have resat the board, no dramas. But my medical situation, having had psoriasis and developing that at uni, were like bar on entry, mate. So I then had to wave all my friends off to Sandhurst with tears in my eyes. Yeah. Which manifested into psoriatic arthritis when I got back from Afghanistan. So I guess fast forward via holiday repping in Magaluf, ski seasons in Val d'Isere, Whistler, Blackcomb, I did a season, Australia. So my friends call it the wilderness years, so best not speak about those. Pre-camera phones, that's all I can say. I then got into politics when I came back home, and sadly lost a school friend on Telek, Lieutenant Tom Tanswell, and I always like to speak about their names, from the Royal Artillery, and a very good friend of mine, Lee Roberts, a Gurkha officer, got badly blown up in Afghanistan in very early, the mid noughties, and I just felt this overriding sense of guilt that I wasn't serving my country. So at the time I was working in Camden in politics. So I tipped up to my local TA unit, the Intelligence Corps, declared my medical. They went, "Oh yeah, rules have changed. That's fine." And before you know it, you end up somewhere hot and sandy, don't you? So back I was, and deployed eventually on Herrick 15 as a Pashto linguist, and still serve just about, as I go through medical discharge at the moment, in the Army Reserves today. So that's a whistle stop tour.
Yeah, so it's sort of it's beyond belief that something like psoriasis, which we know in today's day and age easily treatable and easily kept under control, how that used to be a war to join in the forces.
Yeah. Oh, the words, I'll never forget it. The words were bar on entry, and they brought in another doctor, and the other doctor they brought when I mobilized in 2010, the day of the general election, funny enough, what I've been working on for so long as a professional. But I then mobilised at Chilwell to go back into the army for a 2.5 year FTRS. They were doing all the medicals. And guess what? That bloody doctor was there from 10 years earlier.
Wow.
And
you will have remembered him.
I remember. He probably didn't remember me, but I remembered him. I was like, "Oh no, please roll the doctor dice and all the different doors, all the different doctors." Next, wasn't him, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, things have changed." I'd already had a medical, obviously, to go back into the TA, and pass go, and had to go back to Purberite, which was fun. But yeah, so medical situations have always followed me, and also, in all seriousness, I think demonstrate a sense of resilience and determination to fight against medical situations. But I'm probably about to lose this fight when it comes to medical, having suffered trauma in 2019. So on this occasion, I'm willing to bow out.
So with obviously you spoke about trauma 2019. So this is sort of going to lead into what caused your initial injuries and mental health issues. We're allowed to say that out loud now as men. Feels good. It's good to talk about it. So what happened there?
It was a sunny day. I just turned 40, been on an amazing trip with my wife to Canada to revisit not all, but some of my time in my wilderness years. And I wanted her to show her Canada. And we had an amazing trip. I'm a mad keen motorcyclist. Harley Davidsons are my bike, and when I got back from Herrick, my tour bonus was bought on my first Harley Davidson, which I had
Nice.
nicked. But I bought another one, and I was actually on my way to a hospital appointment for my psoriatic arthritis, and just bobbing away, and my bike was pretty loud, but not so loud that a woman entering on the carriageway from my left-hand side failed to hear me come. And I remember looking to my left and seeing this car heading towards me and saying the words, "No, no, no." And then the next thing I remembered, I was tumbling through the air. I'd been hit from the side. And when I landed, I was facing the opposite direction. And picture the scene. Imagine like a vet trying to pull a calf out the back of a cow. Well, that was my arm in the back of my motorcycle, up to my shoulder. The only thing that stopped my hand being basically torn off was the length of my arm, because it's had to stop at the shoulder. And I was then laying face down in extreme heat. I remember the heat of the day. The pain in my leg was excruciating, but I couldn't see. I couldn't see any blood, any swelling or anything. I just remember an overriding sense of isolation and loneliness. No one was there for me. The woman, obviously, she was in shock in her car, and I don't know what she looks like to this day. And I remember screaming and just thinking that with all the stories of my friends, our brothers and sisters from Herrick and Tellick, I just thought, I've got no right to be in this much pain. You've only broken your leg, you idiot. And my nephew's disabled and has a lower limb condition, and I just kept thinking about him too, and just saying, "Come on, get a grip." And the tears were incontrollable. When they say at 10 out of 10 pain, it was an 11. And I was lying there, and eventually a nurse off duty on her way to work, in fact, was first by the scene, and she managed to calm me down and get my phone out of my pocket and speak to my wife. My wife actually followed the fire brigade to the scene in the car, and we lived just down the road from the fire station. And all some people started appearing, and I remember the blue eyes of the firefighter looking down at me. He was a motorcyclist as well, had a Harley. I think he told me at the time, and he had to physically cut me out of my motorcycle, my arm, because it was stuck. Because the pain of the compression of my arm between the fender and the wheel was another element of pain. So they scraped me off the floor and put me in the back, got breathalyzed naturally by the police. And thanks to the amazing actions of the paramedic and her driver, they stabilized me. They took my boot, cut me out of my boot, and they said, their faces, and cut me out of my sock. They went, "This is a lot worse than you think." I'd actually suffered a D-glove injury. So I'd lost all of the skin tissue on the impact around my ankle. I'd severed an artery and was bleeding out. I didn't know that at the time. The bottom of my foot, the sole of my foot, had basically fallen off and gone all the way to the front of my toes. So that had to be reattached eventually. And the actions of that paramedic of stabilizing me and saying, "Look, let's not take you to Kettering General Hospital. We need to take you to Coventry, because that area is the nation's area for trauma." Thanks in part to Herrick and Tellick, quite frankly. The expertise had migrated to that part of the country. And that action, I'm convinced, saved my leg. And then the next month of my life was spent in Coventry, undergoing several surgeries to save my leg. So then I eventually woke up after my first surgery, because I was conscious the whole time, with my foot in a bag, and a surgeon by my side, crouched down, saying, "There's two options here. We either below the knee amputation 8 inches, or it's going to take a long old time, lots of surgeries. We'll take a bit from another part of your body, either your thigh on your good leg or your back, and we'll rebuild the thing. You don't smoke, great. You keep fit, great. You up for it? Yep, I'm up for it." So 7 surgeries later, over 4 years,
Wow.
I've still got my leg.
Was there ever a time, because obviously we know a couple of people that had elective amputations. Was there ever a time during that course of treatment where you actually thought, get rid of it?
The whole time.
I was going to say a number of times, isn't it?
Yeah, from the moment I was in the hospital bed until probably for the rest of my life. If the limb, the surgeon said to me, you don't want a limb that's crap. You know, if it's just there as kind of window dressing, but you can't use it, then you're going to be better off with a prosthetic, quite frankly. I've actually recovered better than they could have even dreamed. I don't have a limp. The nature of my injury, I should walk with a flat foot. My surgeon says I have a 1 in 20 recovery. He doesn't see this that often. And I owe that to sport, quite frankly. I owe that to community, and I owe that to my family.
And this.
Yeah. Definitely. I do need to give myself some credit in this, and that and being positive. But hard work pays off is a phrase they chuck around in CrossFit, my favorite sport, and it really has. So I had to get CrossFit in there. Yeah, so I was reasonably at peace because knowing so many amputees, I thought, well, my quality of life is going to be good. I'd even done a little bit of work with Blesma, who wrote to me whilst I was in hospital to wish me all the best. My good friend, Cy Harmer, who's a double amputee, went out to the garage and video called me with spare legs in his garage whilst I was laying up in hospital. So that dark humour got me through. But in all seriousness, I knew that there's community there, there's expertise, that I would have had a good quality of life. So going forward, I'm in my mid-40s. I've got arthritis. There's every chance I do need to look after this limb. And I've been reminded over the summer, I got a blister whilst on a hill walking holiday in Beddgelert in North Wales. And I got a blister because I got some new boots, and it had folded down the tongue at the back, and I didn't realise. And I've got no sensation there. So it rubbed, and it took 2 months, that blister, to heal because it was on scar tissue, which is thin as paper. I got a blister this week in London wearing my smart shoes, going to and from an event. I didn't realise. So the visual checks when I go snowboarding, I have to visually check at the end of each day because of the pressure. So I've got to have respect for my limb, respect from those that have been there for me, both my wife, my family, and respect for the NHS that have put me back together. So that's the part I've got to play and take responsibility for that. So yeah, I guess I had an infection over COVID. So the red line of doom was creeping up because I had lots of reconstructive surgery after my main surgeries. So I had 3 over during sort of lockdown period up until last November. And I had a red line of doom creeping up after my second of the 3 reconstructions. And it was creeping up. So I had to go back in for 5 days on a drip to fight that infection. So I that was quite scary. I thought, yeah, it's going to go, isn't it now? So yeah, risk of infection is omnipresent.
Can I reflect on that bit you said before, where you had the accident and you were 11 out of 10 pain laying on the floor, but you weren't very kind to yourself. You were like, oh, come on, get a grip, you haven't got the right to do this. Now that's a mental mindset. I don't know what that's about in total. You know, that will be about your friends that have gone before in a war zone, and there you are laying, having just come off your Harley. But there's something else in that. There's that whole hard on yourself thing, and I wonder what that role in terms of self-talk played in your recovery when I went like that before.
I think it was happened to me. If it was happening to me again tomorrow, I wouldn't be like that. The work that I've done through 2 rounds of CBT therapy, EMDR therapy, and just being a better person in terms of being able to talk. I'm a lot kinder to myself and a lot more aware of who I am. Back then, I wasn't. I was kind of very stoical, the kind of cold one of the family. When my sister passed 5 years ago of cancer in that hospice, I was the one that didn't really show much emotion, that was trying to keep everyone together whilst everyone was crumbling around me. Probably wouldn't be like that now. I'm a lot more emotional, a lot more in touch, let it out. I also think part of it was knowledge. I wasn't aware of why I was in so much pain. So therefore I made some assumptions that I'd just broken my leg. Therefore, level with that level of pain is this level of response. So if I'd known it'd be in D glove, I probably would have been a little bit more kinder on myself. So I think I've changed so much in the last 4 years in my mental response to situations that in the longer term, I'm able to process at point of trauma, and we all experience micro traumas, right? Every day of, every week. So I'm able to process those at the time a lot closer rather than storing it up. So therefore, I think I don't want it to happen again, please. But if it were, I think I would probably be a lot kinder at point of injury.
Yeah.
So as well as that as well, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but it's also what you spoke about. You went through. It's actually, I think, a good reminder as well that you're a passionate motorcyclist, and you wear the correct gear when you're doing that. And in part, I'm going to guess with that, that's probably what's helped save the leg, because I'm guessing the compression of the boot is what stopped you bleeding.
Kevlar jeans,
Yeah.
knuckle duster Kevlar gloves, saved my hand. I had Kevlar top, Kevlar bottoms. I definitely would have lost a lot of skin off my legs. And guess what? I needed the good leg to fix my bad leg.
Yeah.
Because I now have a scar from my knee to my hip on my right leg and no sensation there because I'm missing a quad. Because my quad is now a nice hairy foot. So every now and again, those you get little spots, don't you, on your legs and bum. And they're now. Yeah, I get those on my foot, Frankenfoot. I think it's it comes back. The reason why we've got so many people that survived life-changing injuries during the high point of Telic and Herrick is because their kit and equipment improved. I was talking to someone about this the other day, another veteran who both served in Northern Ireland, and I was talking about on patrol, but as an 18-year-old wearing heavy electronic countermeasures and taking a knee in Belfast on concrete, whereas fast forward in Herrick we had nice knee pads, and just think all the knee injuries that would not be around today if we just had better equipment back then.
I remember deploying on Telic 5, the old ESPA body armor. We only had one plate in the front, didn't have one in the back because they were short on plates. I had to buy my own boots.
I know, mad, isn't it? I had to buy my own softie in Northern Ireland.
Crazy, yeah.
But bonkers.
So, COVID lockdown. That was a particularly hard time for you. Yeah,
and I don't want to. It was a hard time for all of us. Let's face it.
Yeah.
But there was a magnifying effect of hitting 40, of being unemployed, of starting your own business just before then, and then being unemployed and not having any furlough money and not being able to work because 4.5 months I was physically unable, being isolated from both our families where we lived, and having a baby and having multiple surgeries over COVID and an infection. So I certainly I certainly had it against us. I won't say me. Yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. And my wife, as a new mum, all the mum clubs that you'd normally enjoy as a new parent, not for us. Even the maternity-paternity experience. When we went into Northampton General, and I had a meeting with the chief operating officer, who's a veteran there, a guy called Palmer Winstanley, a great guy. I had a meeting with him this week, and I was 100 metres from where my little girl was born. And I was recounting to him that the experience for us was a bit like that scene in E.T., with the tunnel tents, where they go in and they start, poking and prodding E.T. They couldn't see anyone's faces because they were all in those big white suits. And poor old Elliot was there with E.T. That was us. And
it was horrific. It was traumatizing to have a baby during COVID. A couple of my clients, I was absolutely gobsmacked at what they went through. Horrific.
It was really tough. The support that was normally there, the support in the community that you normally get, wasn't there. I was searching around for podcasts for things like for dad advice. Didn't find anything, so I just rang up all my army mates, because most military people tend to have kids when they're a bit younger, so they'd been there, done that. So it was really tough for my wife, being a new mum, and she was caring not only for a baby, but for caring for me as well, because I was immobile a lot of the time. I had to learn how to walk again. You know, I was in a wheelchair. I was then on crutches. Then I was on sticks, and then one stick, and then limping, and then mental health injury. I was going for counselling. I couldn't drive. I was having to rely on others to go for physio and take me to Coventry and back, which is an hour and a half round trip, and all of that with COVID as well.
Wow.
It's I can't imagine. I mean, some of the treatment you talked about, and I'm going to ask a question because I don't know what it is, and I've just received an email today to say that they're going to try EMDR with me. So what is EMDR for those that are listening, like myself, that don't know what that is?
Okay, can I put in a bit of context with CBT as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was exhibiting some really poor behaviours during the early stage of my recovery. Not my fault. I'll take responsibility for it. It's not an excuse, but at the same time, it wasn't necessarily. It was trauma's fault. And I needed a little bit of help to identify those. So through CBT therapy, which is essentially a talking therapy, I was able to understand while I was isolating myself from my wife, isolating myself from my friends, whilst I was habitually drinking, why I was not taking care of my appearance, why I had low self-esteem about how my injuries looked, about how I looked, all of these things that explained my behaviors of why, and also my binary approach to being happy or sad, and actually working out that there's lots of technicolor areas in between, and accepting all of those elements. So CBT was great for me, but what it didn't deal with was the root cause of my trauma. So I was suffering from flashbacks. I was suffering from unexplained periods of sadness and depression. Hypervigilance as well, going out for a walk with a dog in the park and being very edgy, not letting my wife drive, and all these things. So I was recommended, I was in this very room crying to myself, and I spoke to a friend of mine, a guy called Tom Fox. He's a veteran who runs an amazing organisation called Thoughtify, and he delivered a mental health first aid course to me. I've known him for a couple of years, and he kept ringing me and said, Johnny, I think you need to pick up the phone and have a look at Op Courage. Now, I was a veteran. I've got 2 Army numbers, so I'm a veteran and a serving reservist. And at the time, I kind of had to fudge the system as a veteran to access Op Courage, the NHS's Veterans Mental Health Support. In doing so, however, I was able to engage with the MOD and change the policy. So for any reservist out there, you too can access Op Courage, because I've changed the policy by working with Main Building as a lived experience. But that's a little side.
Yeah, well done.
But so EMDR is people call it some kind of voodoo magic, but essentially, and also op pitting was happening at the same time as I was having the EMDR. So a whole sense of trauma around, because I was a linguist in Afghanistan, working with children and the Afghan National Police and all that. So I was having a bit of trauma about that at the same time. But essentially with EMDR, it deals with the root cause of your trauma. And the way that my trauma's been explained to me is that the life of river, your river, the river of life, you have bits of trauma coming down that river. So a bit in the form of a twig. You break up with a girlfriend. All right, little twigs come down. Oh, but it's moving a bit slower, but it'll move down the river eventually. My sister dies. Big bundle of twigs comes down. I then have a motorcycle accident. Massive bundle of twigs comes down and blocks my river. So that unblocking of all those little twigs that come down through your life, starting back from that sense of isolation and loneliness as a child, sitting there on my own a lot of the time, we went through some visualizations under control of a therapist, with some vibrating things in my hands and talking it through. We essentially went through right back visualizations. I had to have an imaginary support team in my head I could call upon if things got a bit too tough. It included my dog, my wife, a couple of friends, and they all had different roles. And I went on over a course of lots of therapy, various visualizations, which included going back to that sense of isolation and loneliness that I was experiencing. That went right. I'm there in the room by myself as a kid, and I'm there. and she guides you back from that. And it started to unpack a lot of the root sense of my trauma, which is loneliness and isolation is a big part of my trauma. And of course, they then start to measure the impact of this treatment as you go through surveys. And I was seeing my scores come down. But I was also, more importantly, apart from the data and being an analyst, data is really important, right? I was actually feeling it as well through every day. I was starting to let my wife drive. I was starting to enjoy things I'd previously enjoyed and previous walks, and I was starting to address things like drinking and that sense of isolation. So for me, and that's not going to work for everyone, we had to sidetrack a little bit because of hot pitting. So it came a little bit more of a talking therapy, more of a CBT straight talking therapy, because I struggled a little bit with hot pitting happening at the same time. So it's a bit of a hybrid of a bit of EMDR and some talking therapy.
Can I come in here just with a bit of the background of EMDR? Because you've just got the twig thing's brilliant. That's beautiful. I've not heard it like that. And that is a really nice way to describe it. And just the differences. So cognitive behavioural therapy comes under an umbrella of talking therapy, but it is a sticking plaster for the here and now. It gives you tools to deal with what you're experiencing in the here and now. Talking therapy, relational therapy, is long-term therapy, building up a sense of safety. The repair part of it is in, the healing in the relationship and compassion and everything else. And that can sometimes get to the root cause and to alleviate some of the traumas. You're right at what you say about trauma layering up. It could be a small event in the long distant past, but actually other events have layered upon it, and then it becomes a big deal. And you have this thing called neuroception, where a familiar flavour from the past activates your autonomic nervous system, and your unconscious response is hypervigilance. And it's not about the healing, it's about the past. But EMDR is absolutely fascinating. Eye movement desensitization reprogramming. Anyone that wants to read up on this, chapter 16 in the Bessel van der Kolk Body Holds the Scorebook is a beautiful description. It's a way of what's happened with those traumas is they haven't been integrated into the jumbled filing system of your mind, and therefore they're trapped in your autonomic nervous system. And the left right alternating movement stimulation, so some EMDR practitioners use fingers like this, follow my finger, and they just get you to notice, and you go, notice what? But it's fascinating. Some use buzzers. With kids, they tap their shoulders, but this bilateral stimulation refiles the memories, the traumas,
yes, what I had.
to the right part of the brain. And it is absolutely fascinating to go, I've had EMDR, you've obviously experienced it, and the difference it can make is utterly phenomenal. However, if you recall the podcast with Chris, it's absolutely fundamental that you get a good EMDR practitioner. Now in the UK, it is very strictly regulated, and only once you've become an accredited, for example, BACP accreditation, can you train with EMDR UK. But there's a lot of programs out there chucking out certificates for it. It's not right, because the therapist must take time with talking therapy to build up a sense of safety first.
Yeah, because I found the CBT that I had, the 3 months of CBT, the 12 sessions, I found really helpful. So what they're doing this time is they're mixing the EMDR in with another 12 sessions of CBT. But yeah, that's all sort of NHS driven. So I know I'm in good hands.
Oh no,
and they like to measure bang for buck, these organisations, whereas a private practice therapist will just reflect on your journey and what things you're dealing with differently. But they'll be like, right, what are your scores today? Oh, look, this was this good.
Yeah,
this is what you got for this money.
And no, that was delivered via Walking with the Wounded, who I like to give a big shout out to as well on this.
Absolutely.
And I owe you one, Walking with the Wounded. And with that, so we didn't just jump straight into EMDR. There was quite a lot of trust that was built. There was that building of the teams and all the rest of it. And at one stage, like, well, I know we're going to plan to do EMDR today, but we're not actually going to do that today, because she just got a sense I wasn't.
It's dynamic, isn't it? And in the UK, it's so well regulated, and any therapist doesn't have a plan. Any therapist goes, there's my client, different to all my other clients. They get their own bespoke therapy, and depending on how they are on the day and what happens when they sit down, that's how we decide what we're doing.
She was amazing. And I also say I did have a little bit of the blinking therapy of the side of it in hospital, because I was in such shit state from flashbacks that I was having to go. I had 4 surgeries over 3 weeks to save the leg. And obviously my physical response to that was not good preparation for going under the knife for, 3, 4, 5 hours worth of surgery. So the in-house therapist within UHCW Coventry, she did a bit of blinking therapies and also some other things about pain management by focusing on certain parts of the room, breathing and all that good stuff. And that was really helpful because it just brought me down a little bit in order to physically prepare me for surgeries. And that was the first taster I had of therapy going, and that was just a simple case of having someone responsible for my care coming around my hospital bed and saying, would you like some mental health support? And I'd read Fox's book Battle Scars. I'd listened to podcasts, and I thought, yeah, because I felt so much more empowered by listening to other veteran stories. So the reason I'm here now talking to you, the reason I listen to your podcast and want to contribute to this conversation is because there might be someone sat there now, listen to this, they might listen to it in 6 months' time, whenever it's going to be. And if you hear my voice, if you hear my story and can identify to it, you might not need it now, you might be right now, but sometime in the future, when that time comes, give it a go.
Yeah, best advice ever. Definitely. So therapy was good. We've got to start getting towards your recovery through sport, because yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have an Invictus medalist sat here with us. There he is. Got the hoodie on. He's a power lifter. So yeah, if you can you just tell us about you've obviously always been quite driven anyway, but what was your sort of driving force in that sort of recovery through sport journey which got you to Invictus?
I guess the first one, being told I'd never do things I'd enjoyed before. So snowboarding's my main sport due to my wilderness years predominantly. So yeah, highly unlikely I'd snowboard before. You were not going to run again. You won't be able to cycle again. But to be honest with you, I didn't want to cycle again because I'd had a 2-wheel trauma. You won't, yeah. And I thought, what? And that then manifested into you're not going to be able to go out snowboarding or cycling with your little girl in the future. Yeah, and all of these things, and obviously I put on loads of weight for not moving much. So being told I couldn't do something, I thought, okay, that's interesting. I remember the first day I was out on crutches over lockdown, and we walked past just around the corner. It's a place called Nen Training, Nene, so Neen. You might pronounce it if you're from Peterborough, but if you're in Northamptonshire, it's Nen Training. Royal Marine there, guy called Jack. Walked into, he was doing online sessions over lockdown because his gym had shut down. We went in there, had a little chat. I thought, my physio, who's at the other end of the building, he was like, mate, you want to get in there? You'll love a bit of CrossFit because that will help your posterior chain. That will get you moving again properly. So I was like, okay. And I remember then I walked in there for the first time. I was going to say a shadow of my former self, but I was so big, I was casting shadows that from all the weight gain. And I just felt this supportive community. So it goes back to that point I made earlier about community, of how I've got through this. And resilience comes not from yourself, but resilience from the community that you build around you. And I went in there and found just an overriding sense of support. The coach's knowledge, they spoke to my physio, they had awareness. I was able to, every movement, there was a different version of that movement. So you had mega athletes and like people like me recovering from illness, or ladies come back from pregnancy, all working out together in this community. So that got me back on lifting weights again. So I've been on the whole Op Massive during Herrick and at the language school. So back lifting weights again. I was then able to get on a row machine. And the good old vomit comet to start losing a bit of weight, because that's all part of the workouts. I was just loving it, but the community. So that was my taster. That was kind of my gateway drug back into sport. And then I saw something on Twitter about the Invictus Games. Having been such a advocate of the Armed Forces community I worked at the MOD on the Armed Forces Covenant as a civil servant. I've worked for charities. all of a sudden I've got to change roles and be the beneficiary and accept help. So that was quite a process to do. So as part of that acceptance, I went along to the open day in Nottingham to try out. I went with my wife, my dog, my little girl, and we went and looked at the sports, met Rach, the previous team's captain from the year before. We met Michelle, another athlete who's one of the ambassadors on the board for the RBL, and had a go at wheelchair rugby, and just felt so, sort of the knowledge about the whole thing. And I remember driving back down the M1 with my wife and saying, "Are we up for this?" And she's like, "Yeah, let's do it." Because my CrossFit has started to pay off in terms of getting more and more me back. And that was the start of this wild, unimaginable journey through the Invictus Games. And I'm ever so grateful for the British Legion and for that day, really, that I went and found out and became a beneficiary of a charity.
Yeah. I'm started sort of the same with you. Was a beneficiary of the RBL as well. Great charity. And while we're on that, they launched a poppy appeal today, and the new eco-friendly poppy. I don't know if you've seen it. It is lovely.
Got one.
Yeah, it's really, really nice. I did some work with them earlier in the summer to record some stuff.
I saw that. Well done, mate. That's amazing.
I'm now an ambassador for them. But my goal is to be where you've been at the moment. I really want that sort of to get on that Invictus train. What was the atmosphere like when you made it? You walked out in front of that crowd in Dusseldorf.
Well, I'll probably take a step back. That it was the atmosphere. I think in the pre-selection weekends, I went into that quite tentative. A lot of time there were a lot of people like sort of throwing themselves forward to be the big personalities, whereas I'm quite introverted sometimes. It takes me a while to go into situations, sort of assess, work things out, and then I'll be gregarious. So sometimes I'll sort of take myself. So that was a bit of a process of, was I ready? And I started to work out, yeah, I am. As I became more and more social, I was trying things out and really applying myself to the coaching that was providing those pre-select. But I think the first moment was getting the news, and I was actually on a train back from London, and not being able to share it with anyone because there was the embargo. Apart from I didn't even tell my mum and dad, because my mum's like the proudest person in Great Britain. She would have told, her friend Mary. She would have told. they would have had some discussions about it, and then all of a sudden it's leaked. But I guess to directly answer your question was about walking out on stage. Oh my good Lord. I was just so proud, mate. I'm really proud, not just of myself, but of those to my left, right, in front of me and behind me. Al Dyer was our flag bearer, who, severely disabled from his illness, and to see how far he's come from initially using a notepad to communicate to actually communicating like the old Al he has been. He was our flag bearer, and I was just so proud of him to be leading us out, to see his face, and just to look to my left and right and see my muckers. So it was a moment of us as a community, as a country, to have that Union flag and the screen, to have 20,000 people screaming, and knowing somewhere out there was my mum and dad, my brothers, my nephew, and my little girl, my wife. I couldn't see them because it was just madness. I was so proud, but it definitely felt like a community experience going out there, and an international community as well of all the other nations. It felt definitely at one together.
It was incredible, wasn't it? I rocked up for like 3 or 4 days to watch. I had a chat with Gina actually, because I was on E3s at Waddington, which Al used to be on. So
were you?
So in Lincoln, yeah. So I said hello to Gina. And a couple of my mates were like, "Oh, you need to go and see Al." I'm like, "Well, I'm going to go and see everyone." But the 4 days that I was there, I missed the 2 ceremonies. I just popped out in between with Stumpy. it was just insane. It was just incredible. And there's just people everywhere. And what the Germans did in terms of, you know, they had school visits and buses of kids and masses of people in and out all the time. And we had, like, I remember turning up on the first day. I don't know if you ever saw this woman, but if you did, you won't forget her. Massive Union Jack hat, big red Union Jack coat, and she would stroll around. And her and her two friends had met watching Invictus together a few years back. They've got no connection whatsoever with the military, but they will get on a plane to wherever Invictus is, and they will sit and they will cheer the entire time from start to finish because they believe it.
I think that's what's great about the whole Invictus experience. Like you said, it is an international community, and just from it's strange as well, because just from knowing people from the camps, when we went over to Vegas and did the Air Force trials, you meet people there, and then I'm finding, you know, I'm getting them people contact me on social media from the other countries, Australia, Nigeria, and it's just one big sort of helpful safety net of people that if you've got a problem, you know you can talk to them because you know they've lived it. And yeah,
the way they embrace the families out there as well was incredible. So when you said about your daughter being in the stadium when you were on stage, well, when Al was on the main stage with his table tennis, watching Gina and the kids cheering him on was one of my best moments. When I was just like, oh my god, look at that!
I love that family. I love that family, and yeah, my family, my wife and Margot are close to Gina and the girls, and it's really weird because you go from that sense of community, an international community. There was definitely that sense, but where you've been months leading up to that is back on your own. So 6:30 in the gym every morning on my own, like going, like the movement of lifting a barbell. I'm there on my own doing all the, you know, my program, going, what am I doing? You know, those early mornings on my own, the sacrifice of my wife, you know, she's then picking up the morning routine. I'm lifting weights. So you go from that sense of isolation, a lot of training on your own. Yeah, I did some group training with CrossFit, but by and large, you're on your own. To, you know, I did a 50k row in memory of my sister because she would have been 50 this year. So I sat on a row machine for 4.5 hours and went to some dark places. A marathon is 42k for reference. So
I've done 50. A couple of halves. I've never done a full, and I certainly haven't done 50, but I've done a team 100 and it's just horrific. But 50 on your own. Oh. Yeah.
I decided to do it on the way to the gym as well. I decided I'm going to do that today in memory of Nicole. So Nicole's memory, she would have been 50. I sat there, and my wife and my little girl came at the halfway point, and little Margot, she's 3, she jumped on row machine, was going, look, Daddy, I've just done 100. But you know, you go from those dark places, very solitary, and that's kind of a bit of a theme here, to all of a sudden one of community. And every day you're meeting and talking to strangers. I remember in the powerlifting backstage talking to one of the Danes and talking about Afghanistan as we were warming up and just having an embrace. I remember, you know, being on the tram going back into Düsseldorf and talking to these crazy Danes who was such good fun, and it transpired I was actually going to race against him in cycling, and just having an embrace with this international community, human kindness at its best.
Yeah, it was incredible.
And since you've been back, how have you managed your time? Because obviously, with most things, when you experience something like that, they do say you need to be wary of the crash after the event.
Yeah, was there a bit of a come down?
Yeah,
I think the biggest come down for me is the realization that the world isn't that kind. And we've seen that played out on our TV screens most recently in the Middle East and Ukraine, that we see that there's a lot of unkindness in the world, whereas all I experienced for 11 days was pure and utter kindness and support. That was my biggest cliff. I'm really fortunate is that I work in the third sector. So I work for a charity called Mission Motorsport as a consultant a couple of days a week. So we've been working on some amazing things for veterans. I also, you know, podcast as well, so I get to talk to other veterans. So that sense of community, that sense of being in touch. We had a reunion as well with the Team UK, which was fabulous. So that kind of contact, the conversations on WhatsApp on a daily basis, everyone checking in on each other. So that family is still there and always will be. But in terms of applying myself day to day, I found it quite hard to get back into the routine of work because I've been doing so much phys. But I've been back, kept the phys up, back into CrossFit, that sense of community. I've actually achieved stuff in CrossFit I've been struggling to do pre-games because I've got a new sense of confidence, new sense of fitness, just to try things like handstands. It took me 44 years to learn how to do it. Do Invictus, wallop, confidence, bang, do it. So it's given me a new sense of confidence. I've got another project that I'm developing at the moment with a friend. I've got a new sense of confidence there. So I think a combination of I knew it was going to come. And I think I said, well, we need something to aim for. So I've entered the British Rowing Indoor Championships in December.
You're at Frick, are you? Oh,
yeah,
brilliant. Oh,
load of us are.
Were you going to go tomorrow because it got cancelled? The Maidenhead thing. Yeah, I was going to go.
Yeah, so we're going to try we're going to reschedule that. We are going to get on the water.
Yeah.
But again, I was skipper of the rowing team in Invictus, and our amazing coaches, Nick and Steve and Ella. But Nick and Steve have laid on additional preparation for Brick. Ella's actually in the categorization team for Brick this year as well. So that whole supportive network, they don't have to do that. Their job's done. Yeah. They've continued. So we're doing like Zoom sessions in the evening. And we've got a program, so that sense of community continues and that application. So I would say for anyone thinking, just have something to aim for. It could be a sponsored walk. That means you've got to get your ass out every day to do some steps. Something to aim for and something that's achievable. I know Brick's achievable because it's the same events that I'm doing.
We might have to talk offline because I thought about entering Brick, but I've just not got back into my rowing properly. I've got back into my lifting, but I've not got back into my rowing, and I really want to. I've only done it once, and I'd love to do it again. But
well, it's about 12 of us.
Yeah, I might have to chat to you offline about that.
Yeah, do it, and that's through the Invictus Games Foundation. We've got free entry.
If you're doing Zoom sessions, it'll kick my own ass to get it done.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. I have to do that.
So something else I want to touch on is you obviously you've got a background, you've got an interest in politics. You're the founder of Campaign Forces UK, director of Campaigns GB.
Great Campaigns. Yeah, that's my limited company.
So you strike me as, I see on your social media you went to the Veterans Dinner with at Westminster, and you strike me as a person that a lot of people say they speak a good game, say they strive for change to help veterans, but you actually seem to be one of those people putting a foot forward into that, and you're quite, how can I say, quite driven by it, I would say. So how did all that come about? Was it through the help you received, or have you just looked around and thought, you know what, we need better?
The latter, really. And that came from, so I'm from a very working class background, didn't know any politicians, and it was through this desire, it's through disappointment of not pursuing my regular career as an officer as I'd wished, that I fell into politics. In the same week I applied for a job with the Conservative Party, I applied for a job with the Lib Dems. I wasn't ideologically driven. I just knew that I wanted to work for an MP. I wanted to get involved. I wanted to serve. So that's what I did. And did an apprenticeship with the Conservative Party. And along the way, you do all the shit jobs in politics. I've been out there on cold mornings, delivering leaflets for years. I've been there dealing with abuse from the public. I've been there running MPs' offices. I've run about 600 local government campaigns for individuals. I've been in village halls late on a Thursday night while my mates were in the pub running an AGM. And I've worked for some pretty cool people, including the current Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps, running his election campaign, and numerous others before they were someone. I worked for them too. So that background of working really hard, not coming from that, it's not been given to me. I've really had to graft at that. And hopefully I've pissed off fewer people than I've impressed along the way. And maintaining that network. But I always say to people that my network, my little black book, is your little black book too. because I just want to be able to share that. And I'm in a really good position of being quite well connected across defence and also in the third sector, and having worked at the MOD and those veterans in business, and also cross-party now, because I'm not a member of any political party, across politics, across party. So I just sort of got really frustrated working in politics and going up the slippery pole of politics, that I'd kind of come to a dead end in terms of how much I could change the quality line of those representing us. And I've thought, quite frankly, we should and must do better. I'd come to a high watermark working with Grant. He was an amazing and is an amazing local MP, as well as obviously now Secretary of State for Defence. But it was local government in our communities where I saw a real low quality line. So I thought, I'd seen what was happening with the Covenant in business, military networks and programs. I thought, well, we're going to set one up in politics. All right, who's going to do that? Ooh, okay, me then, isn't it? So I set up a CIC. And essentially a cross-party community, use that word again, to bring people together through shared values, shared service, in the way that we've got shared values and service on this podcast, and as a really powerful bridge to cross divisions. And we know those divisions have got wider and wider. So this bridge, we've got to keep building it as politics become so polarized. So I set up Campaign Force. And offshoot of that is the Veterans in Politics podcast, because I know that stories like this are going to inspire people to stand up and serve again. And the way that we can do that is by telling the stories of those that have already done it. So the likes of Johnny Mercer, who is a bit of a maverick, was never going to be a politician, but fell into it after service. The likes of Dan Jarvis in Labour, an ex-parachute regiment officer, very operation experienced, is now a Labour MP. So there are about 52 politicians in Parliament in Westminster that have served in some way, shape or form, and across our communities, local government. So through Veterans in Politics, I tell their story. And I know that people that have listened to my podcast, that's been the start of their journey to stand up and serve again, because it's inspired them. So it's really starting to grow now as a movement. So over the last 4 years, I've been building that. People come to me for advice about how to get into it. I run webinars on a monthly basis called Campaign Force Connect, which you can just register for free. You can just drop in, then I'll connect you to the right people, because my little black book is your little black book. And that's so it comes back to that thing about a lack of kindness in the world. I just see this as a way, in so much division and hatred, of a way of getting good people with good values to make decisions that affect you and me in our communities, by getting a better quality line. Because I know I've worked with the good, the bad and the ugly, and trust me, if we don't stand up and serve again, you're just going to get the same shit politicians cross-party.
And you share your ideas, you share your experiences, you share your failures, you prevent duplication of effort, you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, and you spread that love, because there is no competition. This is all about everyone lifting everyone up. And even small businesses, if you've got a local community and there's 3 businesses that do the same thing, they're not in competition with each other. There's enough clients to go around. Share the love, build it up, because together you're stronger.
Exactly. Throw the rope ladder down, right? So I want, people, working class kids, to get involved in leadership in communities and business. When I was at school, there was my parents, my dad's one of 6, mum's one of 5, working class Southeast London, my dad from a single parent family. University wasn't mentioned as I was growing up. It wasn't even in the lexicon of conversation. It was only one teacher when I was 15 saying to me, Johnny, get out of this school, it's shite. Go to the grammar school for 6th form, get yourself A-levels, go to university. You're a bright lad, you can do it, you've got potential. Mr. McGeoch, my brother's thanked him since. I'm pleased to say, I'll never forget it. Without that conversation, I'd never have gone to university, and it's not my parents' fault. Their aspirations were different. That was about, I'm from builders, my family. So you got into building. That was the natural progression. There wasn't even a military connection apart from my grandfather. So without that, the role models you need to see to be. So that's what I do. It's about you
as well. It's about you. You've clearly got a huge growth mindset, and yes, there's a bit of luck and there's a bit of opportunity. And I'm similar. I grew up in Tottenham. I joined cadets at 14. It saved me, and it was only cadets that gave me maybe I could ABC XYZ. Dad drove London buses. Mum delivered newspapers. I went to university. No one in my family had ever gone, and it was like,
same.
I'll tell you what, let's have a crack, because if they can do it, so can I. And you probably had the same when you did the Sandhurst thing. I went to Biggin Hill, Tottenham, going for an officer. You're having a laugh, love. You need to work on your accent. Oh, whatever. You know, and some people that I know went through that experience were put off by it. But I was like, that's red rag to a bull. Let's have it. See where we're going to go with this then. And it's that growth mindset. You know, no one's coming up to you and going, there's your life. There's a lovely place. These are all the nice things you're going to have. You have to go out and you have to battle and fight for it. So when you see people suffering, when you see the gaps in politics or wherever it is, work it out. Growth mindset. How am I going to fill that? And that's what you're doing. And you're obviously really, really passionate about it, which is fantastic because that's your work. And it's
going to do a lot of good.
It's my hobby. I don't get paid for it.
Yeah, well, the thing is, that's what I do now. Like, I love what I do. I'm like, I can't believe people sit down and pay to talk to me. Wow, I love talking. I do a lot of listening, obviously, but and you get to this age and stage, you want to make a difference. And you
I think so. I want the world to be a better place for my little girl. You know, she's my driver. She's why I put myself forward for Invictus. She was my why, and I think that comes back to that growth mindset. And same with therapy. You can't just turn up to a therapist and expect to get fixed. There's stuff that you've got to do and take responsibility for outside of the room. And the same goes for sport. You know, I can't just turn up on the training camps and expect to get fit and expect to, they'll give you the tools, but you've got to go away and practice that stroke on the row machine in your own time.
Jonny, the clients that I get, the spectrum of the ones that will do the work between sessions, and they only end up needing 4, 5, 6 sessions. And then the ones that come every week and they've done nothing in between, and you're like, this is a therapy, you can't do it. Be like this. Oh, for God's sake, why aren't you doing anything in between? Well, all these things that we can do to build up our baseline of mental well-being, that foundation, lifting it up, thinking, meditation, breath work, just being vulnerable with friends, little things like that to build our sense of self. If you're not doing that in between sessions of therapy, you're not getting anywhere.
No, I think there's an overriding.
Put your hat in the ring.
The word I always return to is responsibility. So we can, and some people do that. You can either be a victim or a chooser, and it's easy to blame other people in other situations. I could have continued to blame that woman that hit me that day, but I made a decision that day to forgive her, and then because that meant I could focus the energy on me and getting better. And I think we need to take responsibility. And as a community, as a veteran community too, we need to take responsibility for the shite that's happening in our communities at the moment, whether that be, seeing young people stabbing each other, whether that's be our politics being so divisive, whether that be the litter on our streets. We are a good bunch of people, right? There are old road characters and we all know who they are. But actually, by and large, we have been trained. We've got a sense of shared values and applied those. And we've seen the worst of humanity in this world that has shaped us in our formative experiences. So the previous generation that took responsibility was the World War II generation, who literally stood up and rebuilt Britain. Well, and the Falklands War generation have just handed the baton over to us. It's our turn. It's our turn to take responsibility for this country. And having been away to Dusseldorf, I'm like, do you know what? I feel like emigrating. Germany, spotless, everything worked. Everyone, it was brilliant. And I spoke to my Canadian friends. I spent a year in Canada, a year in Australia as well. It's like, I can run away. We can easily run away, but we shouldn't run away. We as a cohort, the 2.2 million, whatever it is of us in this country, it's time for us. If it's to stand up and serve again in politics, come speak to me. Let's make the change. Let's form this virtuous insurgency to sort the shit show that is out. Get in amongst the community, get in amongst organisations, be their business, be their politics. And we have got so much potential. We've got to take responsibility.
Yeah.
Very much enjoyed virtuous insurgency.
Yeah.
So you've used that before, but I love it.
But trademarked.
Yeah, trademark Jonny Ball. Jonny Ball on the 26th of October, 2109.
Time stamped.
Before we wrap up, you've also got your own podcast, Veterans in Politics. Do you want to give it a quick plug, and I'll drop the link into every channel that this goes out on as well, so people can get amongst that.
That's super generous, mate. The podcast, again, going back to the isolation of lockdown, was my way of just talking to the world. I ran a set of webinars initially. It wasn't going to be a podcast. I decided to run 11 webinars over lockdown because people were, having virtual pubs and stuff over lockdown. I was doing a fair bit of that. And this thing I just built, Campaign Force, is like, oh God, it's going to die now. So I wrote to a few MPs in my network and said, hey, do you fancy doing a bit of a webinar, Q&A? So I got, like Johnny Mercer, Dan Jarvis, Doug Beattie, MC over in Northern Ireland, and a few others, my little black book. And we did these webinars. I recorded them, 20-minute interview, sort of 20-minute Q&A afterwards, Chatham House. So I'd switch the camera off at the Q&A point, record, listen back, and I was like, bloody hell, because I'd actually prepared the questions. That sounds pretty good. There's some nuggets there that my community, wonder if they'll let me share it for those that didn't attend. And I had private soldier to general on those calls, and everyone's the same. Everyone's the same, gets the same voice. And so they went, yeah, of course you can. So I released season 1 of Veterans in Politics, and then people were like, oh, when's the next one coming? I'm like, oh, that's it, it's done. No, go on. So I've now done 72 interviews from 8 different political parties and 5 different nations. I've interviewed a Ukrainian MP, American. I've interviewed the youngest MP, a guy called Phil Thompson in Australia, who served in East Timor and Afghanistan, got blown up in Afghanistan. I've interviewed Sir Ian Duncan Smith, obviously Johnny Mercer, Dan Jarvis. I've also interviewed Crispin Blunt, who's in the news at the moment. And this week interviewed Tobias Elwood, who's got a fascinating story, having come under fire from some of the comments he made about Afghanistan. I won't steal my chips. He's explained it. And that's an episode I'm looking forward to sharing, because his story from, trying to save that poor PC Keith Palmer who got murdered in Parliament, trying to save his life, to identifying his brother's body in the Bali bombing. That guy, honestly, he's been through some shit.
Yeah, he's my local MP.
Is he?
Yeah.
Oh, crikey. You're going to, that story, I came away from that, really, really, really quite moved. And it's a privilege, an absolute privilege for them to trust me with their story. And I think the nature of it being veterans to veterans, there's a different dynamic, and people are seeing the different side of politics, the human side, rather than Andrew Marr shoving a microphone in their face or whoever else. I'm actually, it's a different level, the rapport that we have. So it's just grown and grown.
Politicians are human.
They are. Some of them are. Some of them are. I've worked for some unhuman ones as well, inhuman. But the other thing, my wife's, we met through politics. So every now and again, we'll do a little segment called Behind the Politics. So it's a bit like a goggle box thing. Me and the wife sat on our sofa, just chewing the fat, dissecting party conferences. So we've done that. I've seen her come out of her shell. She's really knowledgeable. So it's been great working with her on that, because she's got so much knowledge. She's worked in the European Parliament. She's worked for ministers. She's worked in Parliament. She's run campaigns. So initially, she was my voiceover artist. I was like, no, you're sacked. You're now actually one of the co-hosts. So, yeah, it's really exciting. I love it. It's my hobby. I do it independently. It's getting better and better. I try and become better as a broadcaster. And funny to say that word, but I guess we are, aren't we, doing this? Yeah, it's all about, the key thing for this is about inspiring. So I always have local government. I've got my first mayor. I'm going to be interviewing a former pilot, which is really exciting soon. And he's a local mayor. So it's about them saying, hey, if you can see it, you can be it. They're like me, and they're serving their community. Why not have a crack? And I don't care what party it's for, or I'm at peace with that. I really don't care. Blue, red, yellow, I just don't care. Just stand up and serve again. That is the call to action. And if that can start with a podcast, then that makes it all worthwhile.
Perfect. So we've come to the end of our episode tonight, episode 10. I want to say a big thank you to Jonny for joining us tonight. Very insightful. Sharing your story. Thank you very much. And co-host Ange, who's our local therapist.
What's he going to say?
I had to pause. I had to think. But she debriefs us when we need it, which is absolutely great. So yeah, thank you very much, Jonny.
I want to thank you.
Thank you, Jonny. You're awesome. I just have to say that I am absolutely, utterly inspired. I'm not in any way ever involved in politics, but I might have to have a little watch.
Have a listen.
Yeah, I need to have a chat with you offline as well. I think you're amazing. Yeah. Real pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Oh, that's super generous. I can send you some. Obviously, the women in politics. There's only one former regular veteran in politics, Sarah Atherton, who's amazing, who's done an amazing thing about women's experience in the armed forces and done lots of lobbying and reports on that experience and changing how women are treated in the armed forces. That starts in politics. She's a former junior NCO.
Yeah,
she's done amazing things. I saw her this week.
An assertive female in the military. It goes
I'll be sure to be getting onto that podcast.
But my big thing, quite obviously, is provision for mental health support. Mental health first aid is fantastic. I absolutely love it. But the fact is, once a mental health first aider has highlighted an individual needs help, what happens next?
Yeah.
And all these veterans that are out there that need support, I really want more to be done, more funding to be sent that way.
I want to thank you guys as well for this opportunity. I listened to the Chris Terrell interview recently. Chris, as you probably know, he got the silver medal ahead of me. I got the bronze, and I'll never forget sharing a stage with him and his mate, with our flags draped over our chest, looking at my little girl beaming back at me is a memory that will stay with me forever. The embrace that we had as brothers on that stage, but then more importantly, when he went to me, "What on, bro?" and slapped me in the arm. I thought my arm was going to break. The guy,
he's such a big lad, isn't he?
They're units. I don't want to feed them over there, Chris. But Chris, thank you very much, mate. I'm going to keep lifting. But it was a pleasure. And so listening back to their story and getting to know Chris, you really helped me with that. So it made me closer to Chris, that experience of the competition, then hearing his story. So thanks, guys. Keep up the good work. And likewise. And remember, you can, hopefully this has helped someone. There's always a form of therapy for you, and it might be getting outdoors, it might be professional help, but there's certainly something that can help you if you're going through that river of trauma. Those twigs can come down, and it need not be a motorcycle accident.
Perfect. Well, those of you that listen live tonight, thank you very much. Make sure you go and catch this out. It should go live in the next week or so, but it'll be on YouTube with the video, Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts as well. So thank you very much and good night.
Good night.